when it's lights out, your doors are locked and it's lights out. You're done. Everything's locked up. If there's a death watch for an inmate's patient, they're oftentimes allowed to go at any hour that they are called to go sit with the dying patient as they pass. And that's very unique. They don't get to do that. They don't get let out of their cell for anything except for these hospice volunteers. So there's certain things that they get. They get a little more freedom to walk around because they have to. They they do different things. So they're very well vetted. But they talk. They're in this tiny little community of their prison, and they talk, and people. It spreads very quickly that people are there to help, and it's really interesting. When I was doing my research, I was in a prison, and it was probably the second prison I'd been in for my research. And it was parole day. And I was walking with the warden, and I looked down this hall, and it was just lined literally with 100 prisoners sitting against the wall waiting for their parole hearings. And I had to walk by them. And of course, my mind goes to all the movies and the TV shows of this woman walking by prisoners, and I'm going to get catcalls or sneers or who knows what. Now, just to be clear, I was dressed appropriately. I wasn't wearing, anything revealing, or, I was in a business suit, but still. So I'm walking past them with the warden, and it was almost like dominoes. As we walked past, they put their heads down. And when we got to the other end of the hall, the warden said, "Gentlemen," and they all popped their heads back up. And she said, "This is Miss Kori Novak. She is doing her dissertation research for her doctorate on our prison, hospice. And she is looking to bring hospice to more prisons across the country." "Hi, Miss Novak, and good luck. And if you need anything, you let us know, and we're here for you." And I was like, huh? They were more supportive than my family was. And, they're clapping, and I was like, okay. So we got a little further down the hall, and I looked at her, and I said, "What just happened?" And
Right.
she said, initially, first of all, they didn't know who you were. They knew you didn't belong here. And you could have been an attorney. You could have been somebody there to speak against them. They didn't know. But she said, but most of all, they knew that you didn't belong here, and they did. And that's shame. You watched shame that forced their heads down, because she didn't tell them to not look at me. They just, nobody wanted to look at me. And then when she said, "This woman is here to help you. This woman is here to care for your dying friends and family," it was instant. They knew. They were like, all right, well, she's here to help us. And 3 hours later, I went someplace. I was walking kind of outside. I was with the warden. We were on the other side of the fence for where they go out to have their recreation time. And we were just walking to a different building. And a random inmate said, "Hey, warden." And the warden stopped. And they said, "Is this the girl that's going to help with our hospice?" And she said, "Yes." And they said, "Hey, man, thank you." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "When they," meaning I guess the inmates, "know that you're here to help, you're in the safest place you could ever be in your entire life, because they won't let anything hurt you if you're there to help them." And I thought, wow. And it's funny because a couple prisons later, I was in Louisiana at one of the very large prisons there that has a hospice, a very famous hospice. And as I was leaving, several of the hospice volunteers asked, "Well, where are you going to go eat tonight?" And I told them I was going to a restaurant that I'd heard about. And they all said, "Ooh, you be really careful. That's not a good neighborhood. You be careful. And it was so ironic because here I was behind 3 fences of razor wire and chain link inside with the inmates. And they're telling me the minute you go outside, you be careful out there. It's dangerous. It's scary. And I thought, wow. I mean, these people do care. They wanted to make sure that I knew, go into the restaurant. Don't mess around outside. Don't talk to anybody. Just get in your car and go. And I thought, well, they would know, first of all. And second of all, how interesting that people who knew nothing about me, just that I was doing schoolwork, basically, felt like I could help them. And they brought me into their world. My neighbors don't even do that.
Right. That's amazing. That is amazing.
It is the power of hospice. And I do believe that. I mean, if I know you've had some hospice experience, those people who have had an experience with hospice, it's almost hard to explain until you've had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And you just want to share it with everybody because it's so great. And people think, ooh, you're dying. Hospice is for dying people. Hospice is for living.
Yeah.
And if I get anything across to anybody about, forget the prisons, hospice, don't wait too long. Don't wait till they die 24 hours later. Hospice is about living your best life for as much as you have left, whether it's 6 months or 6 weeks. But do it. It is the most amazing, supportive thing that you have had the pleasure of having in your life. And in such a difficult time of losing someone you love, there's nothing like hospice.
Amen to that. No, I remember we had talked in private. Well, my that was years ago. Grandfather had passed. He was I don't remember the exact timing that they gave him. I think it was right around 6 months and stage 4, and it was the cancer was very aggressive and it was everywhere when they found it. And basically he kind of kept it to himself. He knew he was in trouble. And but anyways, when we got the news, first you're kind of in shock, and then you start coming up with a game plan of, how are we gonna, what are we gonna do? What's our options? And I remember the hospice could only come in, and maybe that was per insurance, could only come in just, I think, a few times a week. And so as a family, we all took turns. It was grueling. We were all trying to, maintain still, our your day-to-day life with, switching your schedules around and everyone taking turns being with him. But it was. I remember at the end the hospice care. I remember we sat outside and hugged and cried together, and I was astounded by that. The emotion that hit her of just spending a short time, with getting to know the family and getting to know my grandfather, and I felt so honored to have that experience. And so honored that there were people that do that for a living and take on that responsibility. And if it wasn't for them, I don't know if we would have made it through all that, all the questions that you have and expectations and everything else. With something, I think something, even cancer. We can all relate. I think it's. Gosh, I think it's just affected just about everyone I know, and as well as even violent crimes and everything else. But I found it so interesting that you were going into these, what we consider the worst places, and having the experiences that you have with just showing compassion. And
there is a power to compassion.
Right. It opens doors.
Yes. Yes.
It absolutely opens doors that otherwise would be shut permanently.
Hmm. Yeah. It's nobody except for me, I think, nobody likes to talk about death. Nobody likes it. It's scary. But the more we talk about it, the less frightening it becomes. And I don't know if you've heard of, or if your listeners have heard of Brene Brown. She is a researcher out of Texas, and she talks about shame. And she talks about other things like death that people don't like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about shame. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's, but she is bringing a normalcy to shame, that it's okay to feel that. Just like we've seen in behavioral health, it's not as stigmatized as it used to be. The more we talk about these frightening things, the less frightening they become, and the less power we give them to scare us. And I really feel like talking about death and talking about how you can make those difficult times easier will make them easier. I mean, nothing's easy about losing a loved one. I mean, don't get me wrong. When you lose a loved one, it is painful and awful.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no preparing for it. But the more we talk about death in our culture, in our society, the more we understand that it shouldn't be feared. And when you talk about that in a setting like a prison, where people lash out, prisoners act up out of fear of who knows, being shanked, fear of being laughed at, fear of, there's deep-seated fears, but all bad things often are manifest because of fear. And if you start taking that fear away, you take that anger and that angst away, and you give it less power. That's important when we talk about death.
Mm-hmm. You had talked about financially.
Yes.
What
So,
does that look like? What how is what you're doing making a difference? And
yeah, absolutely. Right now, we are bound. Our society and our judicial system are bound by regulations and world regulations like the Mandela rules, that indicate how we treat prisoners. And one of those is, we take them for medical care. And in our society, it's curative care. And it's, as a ward of the state, we must take you into the hospital. So let's say you have COPD, which is, a heart disorder, a breathing heart, it's multiple things. Well, if you have an issue where you can't breathe and you're in prison, let's say you're in a medium security prison, we have to take you out of the prison, which is an ambulance ride, which costs the taxpayers, what an ambulance ride to and from the hospital. In a medium security facility, there's probably 1 to 2 guards that have to go with you. So they'll probably get overtime, and taxpayers' money pays those salaries. Then there's the actual care. So if you have ever been to the hospital or been to the hospital lately, it's not a couple bucks. You're talking, an emergency room visit could be, $30,000. So let's say they have to spend the night. There's 2 more guards on 12-hour shifts. Then you have to have the medicine that they have to go home with. And then they take them back to the prison. And you're looking at, when you take all those costs together, and depending on what the actual illness is, you could be talking about $80,000, $90,000 plus for one trip to the hospital on a Tuesday. Well, let's say Thursday you can't breathe again. You go back. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars that the taxpayers are paying, as opposed to if I want to take advantage of the hospice, I have end-stage COPD, and they sign a little, form just like you would in the outside world.